Hello, everybody. Hopefully people can hear and see me, and thank you for coming to this session this morning. So hopefully you've been to a few of the different conference sessions, and we'll do some introductions in a second. This is not unlike some of the plenaries. Hopefully this is more interactive using a Zoom, and it's a smallish group. So, you know, I've got plans in here for conversations and questions, and I've never ever done a workshop on safeguarding or a training course on safeguarding that doesn't stimulate conversation or people are asking questions. I fully anticipate you might be here asking questions and I've come with questions about the topic and the content. We're due to go through till 12:15. I've built in time for questions at the end. Obviously people need to leave a bit earlier. We're not going to, anticipate that. We can see you. We can't see you hide your camera or leave the room. We can't stop you. And in terms of kind of health and safety, obviously there isn't really any bar. You know, if you want to turn your cameras off because you need to, that's absolutely fine. If you want to ask any questions, use the chat. And obviously tea and coffee and loo breaks and everything is up to you because you're in your own homes, which makes it much simpler. First of all, I'm supported today by Ellie, who's on one, and Ellie's just in the background helping, setting up some breakout rooms and stuff like that. So she's down as well, StreetGames. So thank you to Ellie for helping us again today and being around the conference. And I've got some slides, hopefully you can see it. So the workshop and what we're looking at is around safeguarding, and what we've looked at and what I'm going to look at today is around how to stay ahead. How can we stay ahead of the context and the situation, and look at practice change. So some of this is going to be a case of my thinking and sharing from the work I do, and some of the things that are going on within the sector, and chance to reflect upon your organisation practice and the role you do, and how those two things may need to come together. A bit of background about myself and why I'm doing this workshop is I'm the designated safeguarding officer for StreetGames, and I've held that role for about 5 or 6 years now, so responsible for our work as a charity and our direction, and how we support the network is our biggest piece of work at the moment. But I'm also the chair of the National Youth Agency's Safeguarding Steering Group. They've developed a new safeguarding hub, and for the last 4 or 5 months I've chaired that group in how the safeguarding hub can be a resource for the youth and community sector, but also that's moving into more about how do we want to see safeguarding practices and support and everything change in the future. And the third element there, which is pertinent to what we're talking about, I'm also on the management committee of the National Safeguarding Youth Forum, and as you'll see later when I come to talk about that, that's a group of hundreds of organisations who are on a national forum about safeguarding, sharing, information sharing, and have annual regular get-togethers through the year, this year virtually, to share practice, bringing expert speakers, etc. So hopefully I'm bringing into this a kind of broad range of experience and information from a range of topics that will help you think about kind of safeguarding and where we go in the future. So some of this is also for me, to get some viewpoints from you as some staff of StreetGames, some delivery partners, some people who are frontline workers or managers of organisations. Your insight into this, some of the points in this and thoughts on it is really useful, because there are things happening within the kind of youth and community sector around safeguarding that could be really positive, but obviously need to work for all organisations. So I want to give you some context, and there's lots of things going on that you'll be aware of, and don't worry, I am not going to talk for an hour and a half, as some of those who know me probably could say, well, they can. So I've got plenty of time for breaks and conversations in there. That really, there's a lot of context at the moment around safeguarding. So we've got things like concerns that are caused by the pandemic, and the fact is that we've heard stories, you yourself may have experienced it, where there's young people who you are concerned about being put into their home environment, spending more time at home, that may be more risk for them, being more isolated, having those more at risk who are not having access to school because they're not families of key workers, or they're not taking up the kind of vulnerable places in school. So there's an increased cause, you know, the welfare, well-being of young people. We've therefore got, we also know, an increased level of online activity. You know, with all of our lives, we're running our conference online. So we're running youth provision online, or we have done youth provision. We're returning, and we have returned back to some more face-to-face delivery. But over the last 18 months, a huge amount of online activity. Young people are learning online. Young people are doing youth work, youth provision online. Scouts and guides have done stuff online. So that has added an increased dimension to our safeguarding practice and support. There's new legislation that's coming through. So traditionally, there's been a legislation about the positions of trust, and therefore the kind of defining age around where children and young people can be deemed to be kind of abused in terms of relationships. So if you are within an education setting, the actual age increases to 18 as opposed to 16 for relationships and things like that. So, but outside of that, traditionally, the position of trust age in some sectors was limited to young people at 16. And through what's happened, and you'll see through the independent inquiry at the bottom, you know, within the faith sector and now within the sports sector, that sports coaches, volunteers within sports clubs are now seen as a position of trust, a legally defined position of trust. Therefore, the age at which the protection increases to young people goes up to 18 in some cases. So that has an extra dimension in terms of legislation around sports coaches. But if you're a youth work organisation, you're still not deemed as a position of trust in that legal framework. Education is, healthcare is, faith sector is now, sports coaches are, but not youth workers. So there's grey areas there. We've seen an increase over the last 18 months on what you might deem peer-on-peer abuse, and there's a lot more research about peer-on-peer abuse and how it's dealt with. It's happening much more often within an education setting, and that will in time filter through to other settings about, you know, and some of it is very young, some of it is lack of education, but it is an increased element of risk and worry around how young people are interacting with each other, languages they're using, physical contact within each other, and in some cases, kind of within the sexual abuse end of that spectrum, around an increase in that where, you know, it's within similar age ranges. We've got the issue about everyone's invited. I don't know who's seen that within the news, but you know, and it's a situation where, you know, nearly 20,000 reports have been put online from everyone's invited, where young people have been talking about their own experiences within, yes, mainly an education setting, but kind of the peer-on-peer abuse, the institutional abuse that those young people have faced over a number of years has come out through an online system. So we've got an interesting challenge there based upon we've increased online activity, but we may never have got the knowledge about everyone's invited without a platform or access to online provision, or the fact that maybe more young people were home learning and felt more comfortable to speak out about it. We've got new guidance. The DfE have launched last year new out-of-school settings safeguarding standards that is there to help organisations meet kind of a set standard of provision. Not mandatory, it's a voluntary code of practice, a voluntary set of standards, but that's recently come out, and it's been, you know, delivered as well to support organisations around, you know, holiday fund program. Those of you who are doing holiday fund programs, you know, it's within that guidance around making sure you can work towards a DfE out school settings guidance. So there's new requirements depending on your funding, and ultimately, you know, there's been some big independent inquiries. The ICSA has been an ongoing inquiry into issues within, you know, the youth and mainly the faith-based sector, but you've had the review of British gymnastics around ongoing practice issues, ongoing issues within those organisations around safeguarding welfare, you know, potential abuse of participants and young people. So there's a lot going on, and ultimately this might be headline stuff you're hearing, it might be stuff you've heard about through emails and newsletters, it might be something you've not heard about at all, but all of this has bearing on ultimately what happens for you delivering practice with young people. Some of it you'll go, yeah, I get that, because we see there's issues caused by the pandemic, or we know increased activities online, etc. But there's a lot of things going on around safeguarding, and we feel our job, and one of the things we're trying to do, is share this information out, get better at sharing this information and understanding what it means, so organisations are prepared and we're not having to react to changes last minute and stuff like that. We are in a position to support you as organisations and practitioners on, you know, the changes that are going on within the sector. So there's a few things to consider, and it'd be interesting. We'll not put a breakout room at the moment. Because it's only a small group. We'll go to an initial small group, and Ellie will go to some breakout rooms later on. But I want you to just to firstly pose this question and consider, to think about this and maybe have a brief chat about it. Is it time we take a look at safeguarding differently? And we'll explore some of that in a bit. And what I mean that is that how we talk about it, how do we stay ahead about it, how are we proactive, how is it resourced? You know, is there too much guidance, or is there enough guidance? In some situations, people don't know about it. Some people say, there's too much. So therefore, is the confusion, lack of clarity? Is the training right? You know, I'd be really interested as a kind of opener, and I've given the context about, you know, you've come on this workshop. It's talking about staying ahead and practice. It'd be really interesting to see any initial thoughts that any of you have got about kind of staying ahead. You know, any issues around, you know, any initial thoughts on that first question about, you know, do we need to take a look at safeguarding differently given where we're now at in the context of what's going on and the work that we all do. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute so I can see you all. If you've got a face, if you've not all your names, it's just better either way. But anybody want to chip in, pop your hand up and say anything about kind of that? We'll use etiquette of make sure you put your hand up, but anyone want to say anything initially from that first point? Don't be shy. Yes, Aaron.
Thanks, John. I realised I pressed the wrong button. I pressed the clapping hand one as opposed to putting the hand up.
Well, if you want to give me a round of applause, that's fine. Yeah, that's it.
It's a round of applause and put my hand up at the same time. So thank you very much. I think the answer to that for me is yes. And I've had this kind of conversation with Nicola before, who's on the call as well today.
Yeah.
Around how the word safeguarding is perceived, and sometimes it can be quite. It sometimes has kind of negative connotations, and now more so at the moment it's associated with lots of paperwork or potential paperwork as well. But when Nick and I were talking, it was around kind of looking after the well-being and keeping kind of young and vulnerable people kind of well and safe from harm. So whether we kind of, when we talk about it more broadly, can we talk about it from a well-being sense, about keeping people safe from harm that way, as opposed to this kind of traditional safeguarding, like I said, word or terminology that has some form of negative connotation to it. So open it up there in terms of broader aspects of well-being for me.
Perfect. Hold that thought, because hopefully in the next couple of slides we'll explore some of that. But yeah, hold that thought. Did somebody else have the hand up then a second ago? Was it Lisa?
Yes, it was me, and I was going to say roughly the same. Aaron, the same. From a holistic well-being point of view, I think safeguarding needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
Particularly in sports programs.
Yeah, I think I completely agree, and we'll come on to that. I think that the reflection is probably everywhere, generally across the whole kind of spectrum of engaging with young people within sport, especially. You know, when I put my rugby coach hat on, I coach a under-12s rugby team, and I've done the safeguarding within the RFL. When I put my rugby hat on, definitely so, because there is I think when I talk about how we talk about it, there feels to be a difference between how we talk about it and what we actually do about it. So we're in a bit of an odd position. So I think we talk in spaces about put the needs of children, young people first, but does our action actually follow that? Do actually what we do in place? And I think Aaron's point about suddenly there's loads of paperwork, is that the needs of young people first by having endless reams of paperwork or whatever? there's a mismatch in some areas between what we say we want to do and what we actually do around our delivery. And I think that all feeds into the same thing. So Nicola, you had your hand up.
Yes, hello. So I'm here from ACT, and we're actually a safeguarding adults organisation working in sport. But I think there's lots of crossover between children, young people, into adults. And just as Aaron was saying, we've had this discussion about well-being, and in the Care Act there is actually a description of well-being, and for adults that really is the aim, is to improve the well-being of adults. Safeguarding is one part of well-being. You know, I could show you a graph about it, and that's probably what you're going to go on to. So what is well-being? And there's a quote about, you know, why be safe when you're unhappy? So it's all about balancing, really, about safety, working with young people, and looking at other aspects. So being unsafe can be something that comes from another part of their life that is out of balance. That you have to look at the person as a whole, don't you? And the other thing I'd say is safeguarding. People just need to know what to do. If they've got a concern, respond to it. Don't leave it. And people get bogged down in process. So the thing, I've had it where people said, well, I followed all the process and I still don't know what to do. Well, did you have a chat with a person? Did you speak to them? Did you put them at the centre? So safeguarding adults is all about putting the person at the centre, and it should be the same for the children, young people, I think. You know, there's so many crossovers in the themes.
And I think that's why I put the question there about things like the training. It feels to me, and that question about is it confusion, is the lack of clarity, because it should be. Yes, it's complex, it's difficult. I think, I know there's a couple of people on the call who've done the training we've done, you know, that it can be hard to deal with these things, but nobody pays recognition to the fact that not hard in terms of complex, but hard in terms of emotionally difficult to sometimes deal with it. We don't pay recognition to the fact that that's the hardest bit, is the emotional challenge of dealing with potentially a serious concern. The process bit should be really quite straightforward, but we overcomplicate that end. And don't talk about the fact that this could really upset you or be emotionally draining or be a challenge. That's not covered in any training I've ever seen.
I think you're right. And being process driven, you can hide behind it as a person. So it's basically, what would you do if you have a concern? What is a concern? And deal with it. Don't put it under the carpet. Because, you know, you said about the reviews, and you mentioned the gymnastics one. There's plenty of reviews where, I mean, I could tell you what they're going to say. It's going to be, I knew about it, but I didn't think to say something. I thought Mike Brooks would do it, or I thought that, you know, John would do it. I thought so-and-so do something about it. And basically it's playing your part. And it's all, to me, it goes back to the basics for safeguarding of, you know, safeguarding is everyone's business, everybody's responsibility, play your part, do your thing, have a chat with a person, think about what you're going to do, you know, and we don't always, we've lost some of the key messages, I think, with safeguarding.
We've lost that thread away from, and you'll see what I come on to. It's reflect, I suppose the good thing for me is a sense check here of going, everybody's thinking where I'm thinking, and it reflects what this kind of national move, that the real challenge we have is making that concrete, but it's starting to move about how we can be more proactive and forward thinking, and what we do. There's elements of things we need to do, but we often jump, as you'll see where we often jump to the things we need to do. What you're talking about, the steps to get there, is actually kind of what you might deem culture change, what you might deem a review. We've not done that. We often jump to the end of, let's create another toolkit, let's do another review, let's create another guidance. Well, actually, look at that list of things that are going on. 2 more toolkits, some more guidance, and another review. Well, we've had enough reviews. I think it's 20 years next year since Victoria Climbier. We've had enough reviews, and we're saying 20 years probably on some things that were said 20 years ago. There is a challenge there, and this is being resonated across sectors by going, hang about. People have raised this question and gone, 20 years on, and this information came out 20 years ago. What hasn't changed quick enough? Some things have changed and some things have got better. Let's be honest, some things have got better, and there is a lot of real positive work going on out there. And a lot of people on this call will do some amazing face-to-face work. But structurally, we're still having, if we need the ICSA review, we need a review into gymnastics. Structurally, there's still some issues. going on there. So, I mean, I could go on for an hour and a half about this one topic, but I've got the slides to move on. Pause, you had your hand up. You're on mute.
Yeah, just unmuting myself. Yeah, absolutely agree with Lisa, Aaron, and Nicola in terms of that well-being kind of strand. And I think for me, I think there's still some fear around the language around safeguarding, you know, and about how policy is put into practice. So there's people who will follow policy, you know, and want to do it procedurally, which there's nothing wrong with that. But then when it comes down to the actions, you know, that confidence to be able to do that well, and not to feel uncomfortable, that emotional side of it, to kind of go, we're doing this not just because it's in the policy, it's because we're putting the child at the centre of what we're doing. And this is the process that we go through. And we shouldn't be embarrassed about the way that we're doing that. We're doing that because it's the right thing to do. So I think coming back to those basic values of, is this the right process? So yes, absolutely have your policy, but how do you translate that into practice so that every member of staff or volunteer then works with a confidence and an openness to be able to apply it?
Yeah.
Rather than it be this kind of like covert. I think there might be an issue, but I'm not so sure, and I don't know whether to mention it or not. I think it's having that openness to say, hold on a minute, I'm not comfortable with that. Can you come and just give me a bit of support? I think I'm dealing with it the right way, but can I just have a bit of support around that?
Yeah. Aaron,
can I talk it through with you?
Yeah. Sorry, Aaron, last bit to you. Got your hand up.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And I completely agree with Pos there around that language piece, because I've just now redone our kind of staff induction around our staff safeguarding induction. You know, and we've got a huge kind of 50-60 page safeguarding kind of policy, but what I want to do is draw out the key bits that the people need to know most and put it in a language that people can really relate to. So if someone doesn't feel right, note down your concerns, like Nicola was saying about have that conversation piece, or jot it down and then come and speak to me as the lead and we'll work it out together. And that's the sort of thing that we should be having, not me just copy and pasting a big paragraph from the 60-page report and going, follow step by step by step. That's for me to worry about. So let's get it in a language that we all understand.
Yeah. Here's the policy in your induction, read the massive policy, but actually, do you understand what it is? You need a simplified thing. Yeah. And it's interesting, these questions come into it about, so how we talk about it, how do we stay ahead, be proactive is the challenge. Interestingly, I think one of the big things is we look at this and how do we resource safeguarding? Because it seems to me it's a very under-resourced part of what we do, but a very significant, and Aaron, your organisation and your colleagues, and Nicola, it's a safeguarding organisation, but if you take a kind of youth organisation that's running youth provision and running sports activities, there's very little funding available for safeguarding, and often they try and find the cheapest possible training to do because it's the thing they need to do. But actually, if you get safeguarding wrong, it's the one thing that will shut your organisation down. But it isn't yet funded, properly funded within the core. There's been a piece of research done with national safeguarding organisations, national youth organisations, regional youth organisations on the role of the designated officer and how much time they have to do the role. And it's very, very, it's rare. The majority of designated safeguarding officers in some of the largest organisations, it's a part of another full-time job, you know. And I'll be honest, that's a challenge within StreetGames. We're pushing to try and increase the resource so we can have full-time people looking after it. In some areas it is, but in other organisations it isn't. If you go down to a small level, local organisation, and some of you may be on the call, you know, it's one of 9 jobs you do. If you're the manager of an organisation, you're the manager and you're the named safeguarding lead, as well as doing lots of other things. So there's a question about how is it properly resourced to increase practice, increase focus, have the time to do as you've done, Aaron, review the policies and the procedures and the way that it's integrated. Often time pressures mean you put limited time into it because you just try and get to the basics to mean you can operate rather than thinking about practice and quality. So, you know, I think we're at the point where it's time to say we need to stop. I'm not saying stop completely, but stop and look and say, hang about, we've had a lot of work has been done in this sector. There's lots of reviews, there's lots of policy changes, there's lots of guidance, but are we seeing that change that we want to see going forward? So I want to share this with you, and this is some thinking about how we might talk about it. And it's very early in thinking, but a conversation and a couple of conversations I've been in is about, do we consider where how we now talk about mental health and mental health should be considered within safeguarding if talk holistically. But go with me on this before, you know, Nicola and Aaron, we know we're talking holistically. A while ago, you know, we often talked about mental health just about mental illness. Mental health was mental illness, and that was it. And there's been a big move around a kind of broader spectrum around well-being, mental health, and everything in between. You know, your mental health, your well-being, and there's lots of connotations. We're more open about it. We talk more positively about looking after our mental health. We talk more positively about our mental well-being. We have, you know, national campaigns about it. We're in a phase within a conversation about this that it's now, you know, a much more open space to talk about in what is seen as a more, I think, across various sectors, more proactive. You know, sports coaches are going on mental health training to understand how they can be better support young people through their sessions and activities. One of the questions that I've been involved in top conversations and meetings is about, do we think about this? Do we think about something similar in terms of safeguarding? How, and starting to change, this is not the finalized piece by any means, but starting to change the language about, do we talk about welfare and resilience round to the kind of intervention and referral end of it, which you might go about child protection or whatever, and talk about safeguarding in a broader way of a spectrum. So we start to talk more and change the language and change the way we talk about it, rather than it being a scary thing. That actually safeguarding is, as people have said, all the way from kind of the welfare and well-being and resilience of young people. You know, and if you could translate young people into adults as well, as from what Nicola does, in through to the kind of intervention referral end, where there's kind of, you know, where you may see more serious harm going involved in things. So we stop talking about safeguarding as a finite one thing, more about as a more holistic approach across a spectrum. And, you know, how we then start to talk about this differently. And then again, this is a very early piece of thinking, but it is a point of saying, well, actually, lots more people are starting to say, actually, this is a route that may work. It may give us the chance to refine and give us language, give us an approach, give us a culture and a view of how we talk about safeguarding. That it is a very broad thing. It's more about, it is all about welfare. It's all about well-being, and it is about the intervention and referral end of this. The next stage of this, and there's a diagram I use a lot when we talk about this at StreetGames, and it's interesting from what Aaron said about how you change, kind of look at a culture within an organisation. We use this model that some of you may have seen before. We talk about why, how, and what, and what we want to do is actually focus on, first of all, is focus on the centre of that diagram, the why. We have to start with the why, and this, you know, is about, you know, if we talk a general view about young people at the centre of decision making, safe spaces for young people, as what was said, you know, if you're basing it around the individual, you're basing it around the young person. So we want young people to be the centre of that. When we talk about it at StreetGames, we talk about young people having access to safe, enjoyable, you know, engaging doorstep sport activities. That should be the driver for what we do in safeguarding. Now, interestingly, when you look at within sport, we talk about governing bodies. They do things like rugby. You know, I'll use rugby as an example. Rugby is a safe space for young people to play rugby. Brilliant. The challenge is, does our practice, does our work follow that intervention? Does it follow that statement? And that's the real challenge for us. So if we take safeguarding in general view for safeguarding children, young people, you know, and it'd be interesting, you know, from what Nicola said, this probably translates across to adults, is that we want young people to be at the centre of that decision-making process. We want them to have safe spaces for young people. That's the critical point. That's the centre of it. So ultimately, the middle ring of this is the critical bit, I think, which is the how, which is where we start to talk about culture, language, and approaches. So a holistic model, you know, it's co-production with young people. We have a skilled, people have mentioned it, and Podgy mentioned it, skilled, supported, confident workforce. We have leadership, we have partnerships, we work together, we share languages, we have a shared ethos and approach. So within an organisation, StreetGames, what we try to do is talk about the language we use. Aaron, you mentioned it, the language that we talk about, how we talk about it, how we're more proactive about it, how we involve more staff in the conversations, the philosophy about what's important, the holistic approach all falls into this. And it's kind of the unwritten difficult bit, which I think is really, really needed. Because quite often what happens is we jump to the what in safeguarding. What do we need to do? Well, we need training, we need resources, we need professional standards, we need more policy changes, and we need more reviews. Now, those things can all help, but it's the point of where they're coming from. And the statement that we're trying to say in terms of looking at changes in the sector is go from a point of, well, if we believe the how and the why and the how bit, and we get those bits sorted, what will follow that? We will have training and reflective practice that will follow those two. It will be driven by how we want to operate. So the training, therefore, will reflect and change that. The resources we do, the guidance, the tools, the safeguarding hub that we've created will follow that. And therefore, things like the professional standards will follow. If we want to protect the status of workers, and give kind of professional status to the delivery of activity, it will follow. And therefore, funding changes, language, co-production models will all follow that. What we're in a moment is we quite often jump to the let's do more what's. Let's put more things in without a grounding in actually, is this the right way to go around that kind of more holistic model? There's lots of what's have been done in safeguarding. There's lots more training courses out there. There's lots more resources, and there's lots of resources and guidance. And we have to question, well, are they the right things to support people? Are they the right tools and toolkits and guidance? Or is it just another thing to say, well, this will satisfy the fact that we've done something around safeguarding? And that's where the conversation is moving to. And interesting, when you overlay the spectrum and the thing, you've kind of got, well, this might kind of, it follows, it might be an example. We've tried to overlay the thing. Actually, this spectrum might follow from actually the kind of welfare resilience then focuses around where young people are, the kind of decision making, the centre, the holistic purpose. As we move out, we start to get more into the kind of what we need to do the kind of referral intervention end. So there's a practice focus within there and around what we need to do, but it does map quite well onto that diagram. As I say, this is kind of early thinking, but we thought it would be good to share with this about, based upon where we think, others are at in that viewpoints of what needs to happen. And by that, I mean, what needs to happen in a change of the sector, not more resources and not more toolkits and guidance. I'm not saying that. We're saying this kind of culture changes, it will take time, but it feels like it's the right time to do that. The other thing I want to consider, and it was mentioned, and what I will stop in a minute, I'll come back for more questions, is this term contextual safeguarding is also used a lot. And this is the kind of understood diagram of contextual safeguarding. Again, if it's similar to what Nicola said, you could put an adult in there, and essentially it's the influencing groups around the adult around the young person, that could affect them. So you've got family and home, you've got the peer group, you've got school, you've got neighbourhood, you've got community. There's spheres of influence, and depending upon the influence, it increases the risk upon those young people. Now, quite often this gets used in and this is my experience, I'll share. From my experience, it get used in a very kind of, well, you need a contextual safeguarding approach, and you don't. So some young people need a contextual safeguarding approach and some young people don't. Is that what is being said here? This should apply to every young person, because their family, their home, their peer group, the school, their neighbourhood will affect their situation. And often in the work that we do at StreetGames, we quite often get told, well, you take a contextual safeguarding approach and we don't. And the response really should be, is if we're going to shift the narrative and shift the work, should every safeguarding approach be a contextual safeguarding approach? In one sense, it should be. Therefore, do we need a contextual safeguarding approach, or do we need to refresh the view? We don't. I'm really worried that we're creating kind of groups and pigeonholes. You need a contextual safeguarding approach and you don't. Actually, what we should be taking, and somebody said to me yesterday, and I think this reflects what was said in the conversation before, we should be taking a person-centered safeguarding approach. and therefore we don't need a contextual safeguarding approach. The context is the person and where they're living, and their family, their peer group, their school, their neighbourhood, their community will all have bearing upon the response and the need, because the risk that may be posed to them may be coming from one of those groups, depending upon where they're living, and where they're living may increase the risk on them. When we know that the work that we do and the partners we work with, there is increased risk on young people. When we look at the kind of look at risk and protection factors, if you're living in some of the neighbourhoods that we work, there is increased risk on young people due to the neighbourhood or the peer groups of the families. Yeah, so therefore, our safeguarding approach to working with that young person would need to be changed. But that could be the same could be a different approach for other young people. The context of where they're living and the situation they're in means we should alter the safeguarding approach, rather than what sometimes I see is that you've got some young people need a contextual safeguarding approach, and by intimation, some people don't, because you use contextual safeguarding and you don't. And again, I think this is part of shifting it into that young person-centered approach, that the context fits with everybody. So really, I'm going to shut up now, and it'd be really interesting to see your thoughts on this. And if you want to go in, what we'll do is we'll go into a couple of breakout rooms, if that's all right, Ellie, to go into 2 breakout rooms. And what I've got some questions here, but really about general chat. We use this diagram in some of our training to talk about the communities that you're working with as a bit of a reference piece. But really, this is a chance just to think about, well, what have I said? What have I just said? Does it make sense? But be really interested to kind of reflect upon, what are your organisation's worries, issues, challenges? What in the local community, where you're working, what affects young people? Is there anything that concerns you? Is there anything the pandemic had? 4 questions. I'm not expecting to come back with an answer to all 4. They're prompt questions for the next kind of 10 minutes of conversation about, what's just been said, your thoughts around safeguarding, worries or challenges, anything that you've got in your head to worry that you're thinking, we can share afterwards about kind of where we're going. Does maybe what's been said make sense about how we approach the work we do around safeguarding? Any questions we've had, what we'll do is we'll put some questions, we'll be able to answer the questions afterwards. But if we can go into 2 breakout rooms and have a chat for 10 minutes, we're back at 11:35 and I'll float in between the 2. Are you all right, Ellie, to set up those 2 breakout rooms? Excellent. Hopefully everybody's back and you found that useful. I think there's some good conversations there, and I think there's some thoughts to reflect, but I kind of went way over the chat time, which is fine. There's some good conversations about, it was interesting. Feels like we talked a lot about people's approach to safeguarding, and there's a lot of really good within the work that people are saying about a broader holistic approach to it, which is fantastic. And the more we hear that, the more it makes me smile and go, there is hope out there, and but how we build upon that. I think critically we're interested in both rooms. We talked about the support that's required, and ultimately the challenges as well. What challenges are there for people to come across? So, and interestingly, we'll look at some of the challenges. And I think, support required, there's lots of things we need to talk about. Investment, we need to talk about kind of this being seriously taken, and not just another review that says with more recommendations. There needs to be more work done about collaboration and sharing things, and the challenges that face us. And interestingly, one of the biggest challenges, I think, when we look at this, is about practice change, because we fall into habits around things. A lot of things at work, we fall into we do the same thing again and again because those work, and changing our practice and changing practice of our partners is ultimately really difficult. And I just want to share this slide. One of the things we do within our safeguarding training that we've talked about is we talk about, you'll see this in the safeguarding training about the duty of care. And actually, we all have a responsibility to look after the duty of care and welfare of young people. That tends to be what's been said by us as organisations. It tends to be in our mission statements. It tends to be in our safeguarding policies. And therefore, we've got to reflect how we actually do this. And quite often, we understand the rights of young people, and people will put in their policies and practices about the UN right of the child and working with UNICEF. And we understand that, right to safe spaces, right to safe activities. We all get that. we quite often understand about, you know, the relationships and positive relationships with young people, and might have codes of conduct, and might have, you know, we might have, you know, codes of behaviour and other things in place for staff to do. And then we look at if we look at the professional standards, then we quite often, in my experience, look at professional standards and go, well, DBS checks policies, we'll train our staff, we do all the right stuff. And the biggest one of the four that tends to then fall out is this, what considers the personal standards, what I would consider the personal practice. And if you look at cases that have happened, you know, over the last 20 years, where things have happened within institutions, you know, I often question, say to our staff and the people we do that when we do our training, which bit is it that falls down in this? Which is the biggest challenge? Because we can add more toolkits and guidance, and we can add more policies and procedures, you know, great. And if we take education as a sector, you know, and there's been lots of challenges over the years in education where things have gone wrong and young people have been harmed through education, and obviously been in potentially kind of abusive relationships with professionals within education. As a sector, it understands all of this. I'm a governor of a school. I see this training go on as school governors and go to the teachers. My wife's a primary school teacher. So I know this goes on. The bit that falls down, I can't circle it, is this personal responsibility, the personal standards, the practice bit is the bit that tends to fall down, because there will be trained people who have passed the DBS check and have gone training every year, and the organisation has got it written in its policy and procedure, its rights, the UN rights of the child, and its code of conduct about relationships with young people, which is the bit that falls down the moment an adult teacher has a, you know, in the worst case scenario, has a relationship with a child or young person, or some form of sexual abuse. Now, they know all of these things. Somewhere that practice is spat down. How do we pick up on the practice, the personal standards of individuals? And how do we view that culture change? That means we're being more proactive, because it tends to get masked. And I think probably talked about it. It's easy to mask through having the right policies, procedures in place, and the professional standards. And therefore, there's a big challenge. I'm not saying it is easy. There is a big challenge about this kind of personal standards, this practice element, how we improve practice and how we spot and challenge poor practice earlier, because the other bits seem to be understood. I mean, I'm probably being argumentative in a way, purpose of the workshop to stimulate conversation, but we understand those bits are there. But when I've looked back, and when people have looked back through cases and stuff, there tends to be some commonalities about, it was a trained person, they had a DBS check, we had a policy in place, etc., etc. But this bit was missing. The challenge around this bit was missing, or it was missing too late. The challenge around practice was too late in the day. That meant things weren't done about it. So your culture of your organisation, if you create a more challenging, open culture, you're more likely to create a space where you're going to challenge practice of individuals, and therefore you've backed up by the other three. I'm not saying get rid of the other three, but if you want all four, you need to have some focus on the fourth element of that. And we'll open this up to group conversation. The other thing, and this probably, and it's just linked to it around this, is that we're also entering a world of digital technology. No, we're in a world of digital technology, but more so in the last 18 months. And I think we've got to view this as challenges and opportunities, because there are some things that have come out of this that are beneficial to making safer spaces for young people, and there's some challenges. And interestingly, around the practice, again, that's one of those things that can be masked, because this space where inappropriate practice can happen can be masked really easily by individuals and stuff. So there are some challenges there. So let's open up to chat. What do we think the kind of challenges and opportunities are around the digital space and safeguarding? Somebody start with me. You can either start, you can say there's a challenge and opportunity. You can pick your side. Who's going to be brave? Because usually when one starts, then, oh, Aaron. Aaron's been brave. Go on, Aaron.
Sorry, my bloody voice again. It was moving on from a point that kind of Nick raised earlier on about us playing catch up. For me, I've only recently taken over the lead safeguarding role from Karen, who was massively experienced in safeguarding. and just moving into this new digital kind of, well, more advanced digital time, was around this virtual delivery piece.
Yeah.
And it's something, until I've just done the recent update on a policy, but that wasn't even in there. So this whole thing around like virtual delivery is like, okay, where do I go? Where do I start? Where do I find the information to, so me as a lead trying to find some support to put into our policy, but then also they can give that practical advice out to the staff here in a different language about, okay, from your respective, you know, your Zoom calls, your team calls, how are you keeping people safe? So the challenge for me was around that virtual delivery, and it was because we were all kind of thrown into it at the same time. There wasn't sort of too much kind of written guidance around it. We all sort of knew, and anecdotally we could have this conversation, but it was like, okay, from a policy and procedural perspective, one, what needs to be kind of covered in the policy now to kind of keep us safe and compliant, and then from a more procedural thing, what am I asking my guys to do around keeping people safe in the sense of virtual delivery? So it was a great one.
We were all writing policies and practice and guidance as we were doing it, because everybody was doing it at the same time, because we'd all been told, don't do online work with young people because it's the devil and it's dangerous. And now you got to March last year and went, oh, hang about, we're all going to have to go online, and nobody's got any guidance on this because we've all been told not to go online. So what do we do? There's an opportunity, and there's an opportunity there. The good result is there's some very now good guidance on safe online delivery for young people. So yeah, and then Melissa put something in the chat about an opportunity that has happened through technology, and I think when you look at everyone's invited, and not ways of anonymously raising concerns. I think that's been a huge positive that we shouldn't overlook, that there are platforms out there that have helped young people anonymously speak to people and say things are not good and I need help. Anybody else with a challenge or an opportunity of technology?
Well, I think an opportunity has been we've had more contact with people around the country.
Yeah.
So I feel like the ACT influence has actually grown.
Yeah.
So we've definitely had people over lockdown thinking about things that have happened to them and not liking the culture. So just like gymnastics was, some of the gymnasts were saying, we don't like this. It's no surprise that it was coming out when they're actually away from the setting that they're in. So they might be having more contact with people online. They might be looking at things. They might be seeing things in social media and thinking, well, actually, that's me. You know, in the film Athlete A, that really started everything going as well. So yeah, I think we've had a lot more contact with people nationally, organisations and individuals, but also that's allowed us to contact them and to do online training. And like you were saying, it was the devil at one point. We were, well, we're not going to do online learning. Guess what? We're not going to do any of that, but we do. And actually, like this session today, I wouldn't have come to this session. I honestly wouldn't have thought I could spend half a day traveling to somewhere to go to a StreetGames conference, whereas I saw it and I thought, oh, actually, that's interesting. I'll get involved in that.
Yeah, I think there's a huge bit of, I think we're all in the same. We're all probably creatures of habit of going face-to-face delivery, and now we're going, well, hang about, this has really worked. I mean, I'm currently doing a job, a StreetGames split between 4 different local authorities. As Pos knows, I couldn't drive between all 4. I'd be forever on the road, never been anywhere. In a day, I can jump between 4 parts of the country and do. So there's some real positives to this about, and I think you're right, Nicola, about engagement. We've heard lots of some young people who were quite quiet in a physical sense in engagement have really benefited from the online delivery. They've become more vocal. The flip side to that has been those that love to turn up and run around, they've lost contact with. So there's a real kind of, but as we start to move into a world of going, actually, we can do face-to-face and online delivery, we might be able to engage with more young people. But interesting, I think Melissa's put a really good comment in. The challenge is that with more access of more delivery online, there's more content online, there's more young people online, then there's more bad things online. You know, newer apps get created, chat rooms, you know, there's many more apps, and it moves so fast, doesn't it? Staying ahead. You know, I've got a 12-year-old and he's quite often going, can I get this app for my phone? I'm like, I've never heard of this one. And new chat apps are coming up every time and every new minutes. Now, I feel sorry for him in a way, because he has me as a parent and a mum who's a senior leader at a primary school as a mum. So his technology is locked down to, you know, everything has to be asked what he can go on and stuff like that. So we learned through that, but you just think he's got friends who have access to anything they want through phones and technology, you know, and that is a scary prospect, that the pace which young people are doing things online and accessing things online, information online, is probably outstripping the kind of control and influence of parents, us as youth workers as well. Anybody else, any thoughts on that?
I think just as a challenge, I would say there's kind of a bit of online fatigue for young people as well, who've lost kind of the social interaction of face-to-face, but there's a fatigue, isn't there, in terms of their potential fatigue around their engagement in activities if everything's delivered online.
Yeah. I think that the real challenge going ahead is that strike a balance of, we've done some really good things that come out, and we can see some challenges. We've got to use our expertise, and I think, you know, what's interesting, I think from what Aaron said at the start, we have to share what we've done with each other more openly to come to that balance and sweet spot. Anything that's worth sharing, let's not, that there is still, and Lindsay and I were meeting separately about something this morning, we had this conversation, there is still a cultural thing in it, talk about within the sector, about reluctance to share and collaborate. And actually this sharing and collaboration is only going to improve things for all of us and improve things for young people if we can share practices, collaborate on things, and say, I've done this worked great, can I nick that idea, and be open to that fact that the more sharing we do, we're all going to be in a better position if the driving focus is, go back to that why, how, what thing is the central thing around safe spaces for young people and stuff like that. So I'm just going to finish off with the last few slides here. So in terms of things that we've covered, obviously challenges, fast-paced, ever-changing. There's lack of control in some elements of this. Internet, it's easy to hide for young people or to hurt. So easy to be anonymous. It's easy to be a troll if you want to do that and call people names. There is, you know, and in some elements there's lack of regulation, you know, and that is a real challenge that creates a space. There is space for that, but there are opportunities about new ways of working. Actually, lots of young people use it and they're on it. So we use it to our advantage. It's easier to communicate. And there's lots of platforms to support your practice. There's one I mentioned before, we use within our organisation, Toot Sport. It's an app-based program for reporting and recording safeguarding concerns. Drastically reduces the need for paperwork. It means it's all app-based. It pings through emails. You can do it any time of day or night. Massively improve the knowledge flow about what we're hearing from young people within our organisation, as opposed to filling in your Word form, downloading it from a website. You know, so let's embrace technology in some situations to help us, rather and make things easier. Technology will make things easier for us in our practice around safeguarding. It might also pose some challenges, but you know, let's take some of the positives from this. But ultimately, and I kind of want to wrap up with a final chance for thoughts, is that I think what's really important in this is that we have to reflect that you guys as organisations, the people that we support in the network, have a hugely important role to play in safeguarding young people, and often that gets overlooked in terms of maybe they're not the statutory agency, maybe they're not the school, maybe they're not the social services, but actually there's a hugely important role we play, and the royal we in this, in terms of helping local young people. And it's things like, you know, this is some of the stuff we talk, you know, we have coaches and leaders and volunteers and youth workers who are out there in communities with the right qualities and attributes, who understand the risk factors, who can put protection in place, who are eyes and ears out in the local area, you can see and know what's going on, and ultimately have that local understanding. When we talk about the contextualized stuff, locally understand what's going on, and that's massive. And I think that often gets overlooked in the realms of, actually, this is all what you would say is really good quality coaches, youth workers, volunteers in local communities. So therefore, that's really good safeguarding. And that's what sometimes gets overlooked, is that knowledge, that relationship with young people, the ability to see and hear what's going on, for me, is the biggest first step within that safeguarding thing. It's about how we operate, and rather that we've not talked here about then, you know, safeguarding course and other things. We're talking about the right people in the right areas that we play a massive role in that support and kind of wider holistic view around young people, and that needs to be elevated more in the thinking. But you know, we're doing some things in this area to help, and this is what we're trying to do as an organisation. And for me, as a safeguarding lead, and some of the stuff we do, any organisations who, any of you on the call today, want to know more, want to work with us, I hope you get it from the senses, I'm up for that cup of tea or virtual brew and a conversation about where we go on this. So we're looking at training. We're looking at our own training. We've actually got 2 training courses we've done that we've re-looked at the training from our perspective. And there's some of the people that have been on the training course that I know on the call. There's lots of things, but one of the things we talk about is the challenge and the emotional barriers to overcome when you're reporting stuff, the difficulties. We spend a lot of time looking at the role of the coach and the context. We don't spend hours laboring over the 5 forms of abuse and the policies and procedures. We actually talk about your role as a coach, what you do, and what you need to do when you see something. As Nicola says, keep it quite simple. What you need to do, who you need to tell. And Aaron, your statement, I love. We use something called change, act, tell. We have a CAT. We basically say to our staff, if you notice any changes, know what you need to know what you do about it. Tell the right person. That's what you need to know. And that's every staff member. That's just not the front line. That's the business support. That's the marketing people. That's the finance people. Everybody knows that. So we're looking at that. The training needs to be refreshed. We're looking at training. You know, we've got a safeguarding pilot that we're doing in parts of the country where we're utilising an online system to ping out questions to workers, to give us some feedback, but creating an access to online resources. And eventually it will have a kind of, through the summer, we're going to have a kind of chat area where workers can go on and pose questions about how do I need some help in dealing with this issue, and the members of the chat can reply back with some advice and guidance. So utilising technology to streamline where resources are, but also provide some support and peer support. Now, the resources we're putting on there, we're not writing any new resources. It's taking what's already out there and pointing people simply to say, if you, as a worker, you might have a one-stop place to go for questions about safeguarding, some peer support about safeguarding, and access some resources. What we're also doing with that is then that group, we hold forum. We've had a couple of forum sessions where we invite people to come along. We take the responses from the questions. That's the agenda of the issues we talk about based upon the challenges they're facing. So creating a safe space for staff to share practice, to talk about challenges and nick ideas from each other ultimately. And that feeds into the stuff we're doing around national level. We're feeding this into this kind of review around national level representation, into the DCMS, into the Department of Education, into trying to push the ways that we're working and look differently. And every session I do like this, every time I hear this, it just gives more fuel, more evidence to go, we need to keep working in this way, to keep pushing it. So, you know, we're here to help you as organisations, but we're here to work with you to try and change that narrative and change that message. And there's some support available for you. There is, you know, please, you know, on Facebook, on Twitter, there's a National Safeguarding Youth Forum. Anybody can join that from any organisation. It's we hold 4 to 5 get-togethers a year. We've done them virtually, and you know, there's loads of topics on there. We've had the last one we had a few weeks ago. We had somebody from a legal firm who has done a national piece of research into peer-on-peer abuse, and he did a whole session on there. We often have different government departments talking about stuff. We have practitioners and open forum conversations, and that's got a huge range of members from all the uniform groups, the Red Cross, to local youth organisations and things in there. Free to join. It's just a safeguarding sharing space of practitioners that we'd ask people to join. Because I'm the chair of it, I would say to people, go and look at the NYA Safeguarding Hub. And this is a broader set of resources that is not yet finished and it's been developed, but it actually starts to talk more broadly about risk management, safeguarding, health and safety in a more holistic way. So it helps organisations, and we've got some good feedback, especially for smaller organisations needing things like, how do you write a risk assessment? How do you write a health and safety policy? It's all in one space, as opposed to your safeguarding hub. It's starting the conversation about everything around safeguarding is all in one place around. So we're starting to put risk assessments, health and safety, welfare, all of those things in the same space. So it gives one point for an organisation to go to, you know, and some feedback is also gathered. It's only been live for about a month or two, so it is quite new, and it's being reviewed all the time. There is things like the keeping children safe out of school settings. It you know, has got some useful stuff in there, but this is the government's thing that they're going to work towards. So if you've not looked at it, it's handy to look at. You know, spoiler warning, it is a long document, but as things move, this might be where the government are going. But again, you know, what we're doing through the forum is actually, they presented this at the forum a few months ago, and have said they would like feedback on this to potentially make changes. If it becomes something that isn't used, too onerous, then it needs to be reviewed. And there are loads of other websites. I've just brought the NCVO know-how website. This recently got some funding from Lottery to improve its resources, and is seen as a good place to go. So there's lots of good stuff out there in terms of support available for organisations around safeguarding, you know, and there's a lot of web-based stuff in there. But, you know, the forum, and I'm biased about this because I've been involved in it for years, has been a really good place, because it is a space to talk and share, and it's about practice, it's about advice, it's about guidance, it's about sometimes moaning and complaining about things not working, but that shared space, and hence why we're trying to do some more localized ones, is really, really powerful about sharing practice, sharing what's going on, because that's often one of the biggest gaps that's lost. About if others are dealing with the same, we can collaborate, we can share, we might be able to work together. And really that's me done in terms of where we've come to around where we're going in safeguarding, the kind of conversation about, you know, wanting to stay ahead and what we need to do in the sector. You know, it feels like, from me, my perspective, I've done this role now for 6 years, I think, at StreetGames, and I've been involved in the forum for that long time, that length. There's there's starting to be some momentum about this change. A lot of people saying, as you said, the same thing, but we're not yet there yet. We can see outside of conversations like today, there are still challenges in the sport and youth and community sector, whereby others are not thinking in the same way around safeguarding. We're still very reactionary around policies and procedures. We're not thinking holistically, but the more conversations we have like this, the more feedback we gather, you know, we can start to move that journey on. But, you know, we have the gift, I suppose, within our own organisations to make those internal changes, which I would advocate for, and happy to help and talk to people about that. The more organisation change we start to make, we probably then start to change kind of bigger cultures around, because we're not being driven by what sectors are saying to us. We're making the decisions as organisations. So, yeah. Any further points or questions? We've got 5 minutes before it's 12:15, and we technically have to finish. But and thank you, Nicola, for putting those things in. Yes, Ancraft Trust is really good as well. We've had some conversations with them through Sport England, and what they're doing some work for Sport England on, I think, safeguarding adults, aren't they?
No, and yeah, it'd be really good to link in with you, because I think what you're saying is what we're saying.
Yeah.
I don't think anything is different. So we've got a Safer Culture campaign, and yeah, Bianca's signed up to it from Ken, and hoping Aaron will, you know. So we've got NGBs, we've got active partnerships signing up to it, but it can be any organisation that's working with, you know, sport and activity organisations, and love to hear about what people are doing with children and young people, and how it reflects what we're saying about adults, because the bigger safeguarding umbrella is there, isn't it? We all sit underneath it. So
there's everything is, I think what I found is everything is there. It's not yet joined up in a way. No. I don't think we need lots of. There's nothing new needed. What I think you'll be interested in, and offline we can have this conversation, that within the Safeguarding Steering Group Hub, we're trying to move a conversation to a point of, we actually need to start to get the right organisations together to influence the policy change and practice change, and that terrible language in a way, the door is open because of the hub. So it might be that yourself or somebody from the trust joins the steering group hub, because on there we've got DFE, DCMS, NCS, ourselves, Youth United, we've got members of the Safeguarding Forum. And what we found is that that group of people don't want to talk about contents of a website. They want to talk about changing culture. But the website was the reason to get them there. And now they're all there. We're like, right, great, you're here now. Right, you now want to talk about culture change. And I've had some one-to-one conversations with some of the senior team within the DFE and DCMS about this. Who are all like, we don't want any more toolkits and guidance. They want to see culture change. So it's almost been passed to the sector to say, right, do something about it. We don't want you. We're not going to fund you to do another policy. We don't want more toolkits. We don't want more guidance. Almost in between the lines was, you go and get yourself sorted and work together on something, because
brilliant.
So it's everything is in the place. It's like we now have to do it, and I think it's that. And but ultimately, as you will probably guess, and I think into the conversation we had this morning, that is one of the biggest challenges. Is now it's not about the belief; it's about the collaboration. And ultimately, when that happens within some sectors, the politics of it comes into place between organisations. I think that, sadly, will be the one thing that I could see stumbling this, is not people who really want to do it and local deliverers and things. It then comes down to some sector politics, which is sad in a way. But you know, we've got at least the right people coming to get some regular meetings saying we want to do something. So we're starting there. The journey is there, which is good. So,
and of course, youth workers, you're all about collaboration and about developing. And I just think youth work has got such a creative spirit. Safeguarding, we can be quite narrow and can just be focused on policies and procedures, and we don't do development. We do expect things to come to us instead of thinking, well, actually we can shape it from here and then get change there. And so I'm more on your side. That's basically the way I would see it.
Yeah, wonderful. Yes, any more questions or thoughts? I think we've got the people have left already.